The United Nations warns in its most recent climate report that greenhouse gas emissions are still rising, making it harder for world leaders to stop the effects of climate change from getting worse. The report, published Monday by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, states that emissions in 2019 were about 12% higher than they were in 2010 and 54% higher than they were in 1990. This increase was primarily attributable to increases in fossil fuel production, industrial activity, and methane emissions. According to the report, this has caused many weather and climate extremes to already be impacted by human-caused climate change in every region of the world, with consequent widespread negative effects and associated losses and damages to both nature and people. Long Beach, California's once thriving Los Cerritos Wetlands is now primarily privately owned and is used for oil extraction and processing operations. According to the report, the window of opportunity to ensure a livable and sustainable future is rapidly closing. Global warming mitigation will require a quantum leap in climate action, according to a statement from UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres. The ice on which humanity is skating is melting quickly, according to Guterres. UN Secretary-General issues warning about impact of sea level rise, which may lead to mass population exodus. According to the report, if greenhouse gas emissions aren't stopped, warming will continue to increase, and every degree of warming will make hazards worse. However, the warming will stop within about 20 years if emissions are drastically cut. However, some future changes, like sea level rise, are unavoidable or irreversible, but they can be restricted with significant reductions in the world's greenhouse gas emissions. The authors emphasize that in order to keep global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, the world must reach net zero by the early 2050s, which would mean that all human-made carbon and greenhouse gas emissions would be eliminated or removed. The report also explains why this target is crucial, stating that any additional warming will exacerbate hazards like extreme heat and severe precipitation, and raise the dangers of species extinction, more days of extreme heat that could be hazardous to human health, and decreased crop or fishery yields. The UN advised in the report that the decisions and actions taken in this decade would have an impact both now and thousands of years in the future. The report is a compilation of the IPCC's work over the past 9 years, which brings together the world's top climate scientists to produce authoritative reports that inform national and international climate policies and objectives. Every nation that takes part in the Paris Agreement has agreed to the language. As the world approaches these crucial deadlines to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.5 degrees Fahrenheit, civil society organizations are framing the literature as the final UN climate report, with the goal of cutting global emissions nearly in half by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. The report, which covers roughly 200 years of warming, is crucial because it represents the most comprehensive collection of the knowledge on climate change, according to Stephanie Rowe, global climate and energy lead scientist for the World Wildlife Fund, who spoke to ABC News. For policymakers, decision-makers, and the general public, it essentially lays out the primary causes and drivers of climate change, the impacts of climate change, and the solutions to climate change in a way that is much more accessible, clear, and succinct, according to Rowe. Ani Dasgupta, President and Chief Executive Officer of the World Resources Institute, said in a statement that the IPCC report is both a blistering condemnation of major emitters in action and a sound blueprint for a much safer and more equitable world. Despite the report's dire warnings, Dasgupta continued, the IPCC is hopeful because it offers a narrow path to securing a livable future if the world changes its course quickly. This entails significant emission reductions from every sector of the economy, as well as increased investments to support those who are suffering from unavoidable climate losses and damage, and to build resilience to climate impacts. All 195 parties to the Paris Agreement have endorsed the report, making it the undisputed summary of climate science and mitigation measures going into the following few years of international climate negotiations. The report's approval was initially postponed due to a conflict between developed and developing nations over emissions targets and financial assistance for vulnerable populations, according to the Associated Press. Large nations like China, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, the European Union, and the U.S. engaged in negotiations over the weekend regarding the wording of key passages, and the text's final form was agreed upon on Sunday, according to the AP. In order to keep the objective of staying below 1 5 degrees of warming alive, Guterres has proposed a climate solidarity pact to the G20 countries, which would call for all major emitters to make additional efforts to reduce emissions, and wealthier nations to mobilize financial and technical resources to support emerging economies. Every nation needs to contribute to the solution, according to Guterres. Demanding others to move first only makes sure that humanity is left behind.